Every one of us has, at least once, experienced that inexplicable feeling of discomfort when intuition persistently signals that something is wrong, yet reason cannot pinpoint the exact cause. There arises a sensation as if our own decisions are not made by our own will, as if an invisible force guides every step. Perhaps you've had to provide services you didn't want to, concede arguments where you were right, or trust people who later revealed their true nature. If such situations have occurred in your life, it's worth considering the nature of these phenomena. There is a harsh reality. Manipulation surrounds us everywhere. Loved ones, media, leaders, all of them, consciously or not, use hidden mechanisms of the human mind to influence our decisions and actions. And the most unsettling part is that often, we don't even realize we are being manipulated. This doesn't require hypnosis or sophisticated mind control techniques like in movies. The most effective manipulation is the one that convinces us of our own freedom of choice, that the decision was made independently, and that any mistake is the result of a personal miscalculation. Most people live their lives in silent submission, led like pieces in a chess game they don't even know exists. And when they try to resist, they are overcome with guilt, fear, and doubt. They have been emotionally conditioned not to resist, suppressing their will and initiative. If you're currently thinking this doesn't apply to you, pause and reflect. For precisely this inaction is what an experienced manipulator seeks. Instead of empty promises of comfort, this narrative offers practical tools for protection against manipulation. Like the wise strategist described by Machiavelli, a skilled manipulator does not resort to brute force or coercion. Instead, they carefully study those around them, identifying their vulnerabilities and hidden motives. They understand what drives each person and use this knowledge for their own ends. And if a person doesn't realize their true desires and aspirations, they inevitably become a pawn in someone else's game. This discussion will uncover subtle methods of manipulation, emotional ploys, and delicate control techniques used in everyday life. The reader will learn to recognize these patterns and identify their own weak spots to effectively protect their mind from external influence. For true freedom lies not in unrestrained pursuit of desires, but in a deep understanding of their causes and consequences. This material is a call to action for those tired of being manipulated, who have endured the pain of silent suffering, unjustified accusations, and imposed beliefs. Here, everyone can learn to step out of the puppet shadow and become a confident strategist of their own life. However, one must remember, once you see the true picture, it's impossible to return to previous ignorance. The knowledge presented will fundamentally change your perception of people and yourself, opening your eyes to the hidden mechanisms of power and influence. The reader should prepare for a transformation that will forever alter their view of the world. Have you ever wondered why some individuals manage to achieve what they want, even when it seems they don't deserve it? They don't resort to shouting, threats, or pleas. Their weapon is persuasion and involvement. They skillfully direct the situation so that yielding seems like your own decision. And it's not about charisma, but about refined technique, manipulation presented in its purest and most effective form. A manipulator does not act spontaneously. They are an observer, an analyst, studying you inside and out. They are attentive to your reactions, identifying your vulnerabilities and emotional needs. They unerringly pinpoint moments when you crave approval, when you are paralyzed by the fear of rejection, when guilt arises at the mere thought of saying no. And they use this knowledge for their own purposes. Skilled manipulation begins long before the first word is spoken. It starts with a silent analysis of your body language, voice intonations, pauses, and speech. Some manipulators resort to charm, showering you with smiles and compliments, positioning themselves as something exceptional. They create the illusion that you are noticed, heard, and understood. But behind this mask of benevolence lies cold calculation. They seek to create a sense of emotional debt in you. After all, when someone shows excessive kindness, there is an instinctive desire to reciprocate. And it is at this moment that you begin to yield. There are other tactics, too, where the manipulator chooses the role of a victim, skillfully feigning being overwhelmed by problems and general misunderstanding, creating in their target a sense of exclusivity and indispensability. Gradually, the victim of manipulation finds themselves drawn into a situation of emotional dependence, where any display of detachment or refusal is perceived as a personal betrayal, requiring no open conflict. A sad look or a sharp remark is enough to induce guilt and make the victim voluntarily take responsibility for someone else's problems. A skilled manipulator never resorts to direct requests. They skillfully guide the situation so that the victim offers their help themselves. Another common technique is the use of fear. The manipulator paints vivid pictures in the victim's imagination of catastrophic consequences that will supposedly occur in case of disobedience or disagreement. Threats of loneliness, losing unique relationships, all undermine the victim's self-confidence and capabilities. Thus, the manipulator binds the victim's will with invisible chains woven from fears and doubts, forcing them to remain trapped of their own volition. These manipulation strategies are by no means novel. Niccolò Machiavelli, in his treatise, The Prince, analyzed manipulation with surgical impartiality as an effective tool for maintaining power. He was one of the first to realize that human behavior is based on interests and emotions, and those who can manage these factors are capable of shaping reality to their liking. As the thinker noted, people trust their eyes more than their hands, because everyone can see, but few can touch. Manipulation, in essence, is a carefully choreographed visual and emotional spectacle designed to create an illusion of reality and subjugate another person's will. The manipulator skillfully unfolds a theatrical stage before us, where we, unknowingly, become part of the acting troupe. They expertly assign roles, create a script, and subject us to their will. The most terrible thing about this is that we sincerely believe in the authorship of what is happening, not realizing that this spectacle is only possible thanks to our internal vulnerabilities, emotional gaps, weaknesses, and unfulfilled desires. This is where we approach the question of vulnerability, which makes us easy prey for manipulators. As long as we do not recognize our weak points, we will continue to be manipulated, disguised as love, friendship, or respect. It's time to tear off the veils of this lie. We are manipulated not because we are weak, but because we are human. Each of us has our emotional blind spots, unresolved conflicts, unhealed wounds, and unspoken needs that create breaches in our defenses. It is at these moments that the manipulator appears. They do not coerce, but listen attentively, picking up what is hidden even from our own gaze. Some of us have an insatiable thirst for approval, for from an early age we were taught to earn love and affection by pleasing others. We learned that love is a reward, not an inherent right. So we begin to shape our behavior to be accepted, valued, and noticed. This need, this gaping void in the soul, becomes an invitation for the manipulator. They throw us crumbs of validation, and in return, we shower them with blind loyalty. They say what we long to hear, and in exchange, we give up our independence and free will. There are people burdened by guilt, as if by an invisible load. They torment themselves for saying no, for striving for personal priorities, for setting boundaries in relationships. From childhood, they were convinced that self-care is selfishness, and self-sacrifice is the highest virtue. Therefore, even feeling discomfort, they take no action, fearing to appear overly strict, ungrateful, or insensitive. Manipulators skillfully use this sense of guilt, presenting themselves as benefactors, striving solely for their victim's good. Under the guise of noble intentions, they begin to control decisions, using distorted moral principles as a cover. Others live in the grip of fear, the fear of being rejected, lonely, forgotten. They desperately cling to any connections, even if they poison their existence, just to avoid facing the terrifying emptiness. The manipulator offers them an illusory sense of security and then threatens to take it away. The victim is convinced of their own insignificance without the manipulator, and they believe it, because fear has long planted these doubts in their soul. All these vulnerabilities have their roots. They do not arise out of nowhere. They're a consequence of past experiences, unexpressed traumas, inherited emotional states. And until a person addresses these wounds, they will remain open, making them easy prey for those who approach with a hypocritical smile and hidden intentions, unerringly finding their pain points. Niccolò Machiavelli, a perceptive thinker, understood that true dominion is based not on brute force, but on a deep understanding of human vulnerabilities. He noted the inconstancy of human nature, people's tendency to be easily persuaded, but with difficulty to retain acquired belief. The manipulator, therefore, does not expend effort on persuasion. They skillfully fill voids, penetrating where awareness is absent. However, there is a way out of this trap. A person is not obliged to remain predictable in their emotional reactions. It is possible to learn to recognize one's own vulnerable spots and strengthen them. Only then will an individual cease to be easy prey and gain clarity in life. It is this process of acquiring emotional armor that will be discussed next: how to create genuine immunity to manipulation. To stop being a hostage to someone else's will requires considerable courage. Many yearn for liberation from manipulation, but few are willing to pay the price for emotional freedom, for the painful realization of truth, for truth, as is known, sets you free, but first it hurts. The first wound that needs to be healed is the dangerous illusion that kindness, sensitivity, and understanding can protect against manipulation. This is not the case. It is precisely these virtues, lacking clarity and balance, that make a person vulnerable and turn them into an easy target. Developing emotional resilience is not about becoming unfeeling, but rather about achieving deep self-awareness. The essence lies in ceasing to respond involuntarily to emotional triggers that manipulators skillfully exploit. The initial step on this path is recognizing your own behavioral patterns. It is important to pause and carefully analyze yourself. What factors compel you to make concessions? Perhaps it is the fear of upsetting someone, the fear of rejection, or the desire for peace at any cost, even at your own expense. Understanding these driving forces opens the way to changing the situation. The next important step is to develop what Machiavelli would call strategic detachment. You must learn to maintain emotional distance in various situations without losing the capacity for empathy. This implies observing from a distance without immediate involvement. It is important not to perceive flattery as undisputed truth and to notice moments when someone tries to control you through emotions. In such cases, it is necessary to pause and carefully consider your actions before reacting. Manipulators succeed by exploiting your emotional impulsiveness. They need you to feel, not to think. Therefore, it is extremely important to learn to think first. The third cornerstone of protection against manipulation is the cultivation of unpredictability, which is a powerful tool against those who seek to control others. Manipulators, like experienced cartographers, meticulously study the behavioral patterns of their victims, building detailed schemes of their reactions. They unerringly foresee that tears will evoke sympathy, flattery will dull vigilance, and pressure will force a concession. To disrupt these insidious plans, it is necessary to break the established order. Surprise manipulators by saying a firm no in response to an expected yes, disappear from their sight when they expect persistence, and remain silent where they anticipate confrontation. Such tactics disarm the manipulative game and force the opponent to reveal their true intentions, dropping their mask. No less important an element of protection is the formation of a stable identity. The deeper a person understands their essence, their values, and their beliefs, the less they need external approval. And the less the need for confirmation of one's own significance, the harder it becomes to manipulate them. Manipulators succeed by distorting the victim's self-perception, making them doubt, reevaluate, and reconsider their decisions, adapting to someone else's narrative. However, when the internal vision of oneself becomes unshakable, external control loses its power, breaking against the armor of confidence and self-sufficiency. Do not delude yourself into believing that emotional resilience arises from watching videos. No, it is forged in the crucible of continuous self-analysis, in overcoming the obsessive desire to please everyone, and firmly upholding one's own convictions. Even when the atmosphere around is permeated with a sense of awkwardness and discomfort, it is born from the realization that one owes nothing to anyone but the preservation of one's mental integrity. In the modern world, where emotional manipulation has become commonplace, maintaining sanity is in itself an act of defiance. Niccolò Machiavelli once remarked that men ought either to be caressed or crushed, for they will revenge themselves for slight wrongs, whilst for grave ones they cannot. This thought, though perhaps cruel, exposes an unpleasant truth. In the struggle for power, there is no neutral territory. A person either occupies a dominant position in the emotional field or becomes an object of manipulation themselves. But what if the manipulator is close by, at home, at work, in the marital bed? What to do when breaking off the relationship seems impossible? In the following narrative, we will delve into the complex realm of interpersonal manipulation, particularly in close relationships, and explore ways to resist emotional control, even if the manipulator is a loved one. This, perhaps, will be the most serious test of willpower and emotional resilience. Discussing manipulation is easy when the puppet master is a stranger. However, realizing the bitter truth becomes a real challenge when the strings of control are pulled by someone you feel warmly about, a parent, a beloved, a boss who lent a helping hand, or a close friend. In such situations, manipulation takes on more sophisticated, insidious, and painful forms, masquerading as affection, care, and devotion. Fearing to break this bond, a person finds themselves trapped in an emotional web that gradually drains their energy, deprives them of clarity of thought, and blurs their personal boundaries. A skilled manipulator does not need to lie. They skillfully distort reality. They do not need to raise their voice. They skillfully insinuate. They do not prevent freedom of choice. but skillfully induce guilt for any deviation from their script. Over time, the victim stops asking questions, begins to carefully choose words, and avoids conflict situations. They calculate possible reactions in advance, striving to maintain a fragile peace. Imperceptibly, the person becomes a prisoner of an invisible prison, whose walls are built of emotional bricks. In romantic relationships, such behavior can be disguised as strong attachment. I only do this out of love for you. Without you, my life loses meaning. However, love that demands unconditional submission is nothing more than emotional blackmail. In the family circle, this can be presented as a tribute to tradition. You can't do that to your mother. You must show respect to your elders. But respect based on guilt is not true respect, but a tool of control. At work, it can take the form of loyalty. You should be grateful. Who else would offer you such an opportunity? However, gratitude used as an unbearable debt is nothing less than sophisticated manipulation. The crux of the problem is this: intimacy in no way justifies emotional abuse. Love, however strongly expressed, does not grant a carte blanche to reshape another person, using fear or guilt as tools. However, before breaking this vicious circle, one unpleasant truth must be accepted. Not every relationship, even those based on strong attachment, is healthy and harmonious. Not every person who feels warmly towards you possesses the ability to love truly freely, without conditions and manipulations. And not every bond that keeps you close truly protects and guards you. Sometimes such bonds become an obstacle to personal growth and self-realization. What to do in such a situation? First and foremost, establish clear boundaries. Unshakable, firm boundaries that need no justifications or apologies. A simple and calm no has much greater power than 1,000 emotional arguments. The next step is exposure. Speak openly and honestly about what you see, what you feel, and what you are no longer willing to tolerate. It is important to emphasize that this is not done to convince the other person, but to assert your own position and declare your needs. And finally, the most important thing, stand your ground when the inevitable reactions follow. And they will. Insults, attempts to play the victim, demonstrative silence. All these are favorite tactics of manipulators. Remember, the manipulator feeds on your indecision and insecurity. They will constantly test your boundaries, hoping you will retreat and give in. The reality is that sometimes true love requires the courage to leave. This means breaking a painful connection and allowing the other person to face their own inner emptiness. As long as you strive to save, support, or justify, change will not come, and you risk losing yourself. This is not an easy, but a necessary choice. Only by freeing yourself from toxic relationships can you develop a new vision that penetrates through words, masks, and superficial intentions. It is with this renewed perception that we enter the next stage of life. How can Machiavelli's strategic thinking be applied in the modern world to maintain clarity of mind under constant influence? It's time to change the rules of the game. Machiavelli did not seek to please, nor did he care about creating an impression of ethics or virtue. He was true to the harsh, unvarnished reality that most prefer to ignore. To survive psychologically in the modern world, one must learn to think like him, with ruthless clarity, cold strategy, and emotional detachment. Make no mistake, we live in an era of incessant manipulation. Social media, marketing, politics, religion, relationships, all are built on influence, image, and narrative. Those who are unaware risk being consumed by this system. Niccolò Machiavelli, the insightful Renaissance thinker, viewed human nature as a phenomenon subject to certain patterns. In his opinion, people's actions are guided primarily by personal interests and are susceptible to emotional influence. Machiavelli asserted that those capable of grasping these driving forces of human behavior gain power over others. He eloquently expressed this idea in his famous saying, "People generally judge more by their eyes than by their hands. Everyone can see, but few can touch." In other words, the perception of reality created in people's minds holds far greater significance than reality itself. It is on this principle that the modern political and social game is built. He who controls public opinion and shapes the narrative also determines and directs decision-making. He who creates an appealing image possesses the power of influence. And finally, he who understands the psychological mechanisms governing human behavior can control the actions of others without resorting to brute force or coercion. What does this mean in practice? It means the necessity of a conscious approach to one's emotions and actions, a refusal to blindly follow emotional impulses. Machiavelli did not recognize the existence of universal moral principles applicable in all situations. He He believed that morality is determined by context. What is an advantage in one situation can turn into a weakness in another. Noble intentions, detached from reality, can lead to strategic failure. Kindness, unsupported by understanding, becomes folly. Honesty, displayed at the wrong time, can lead to self-destruction. Unlimited altruism, according to Machiavelli, is nothing more than slavery. If one seeks freedom and independence, one must learn to play by the rules of this world and master the art of effective interaction with it. Observation becomes the starting point in the art of understanding human nature. Just as Machiavelli studied the nobility, one should learn to read people not by their words, but by the actions they take when they think no one is watching. It is important to evaluate real behavior, not empty promises, to analyze consistent patterns, not fabricated excuses. One must exercise caution and trust words less, striving to discern the hidden motives and interests behind them. The main thing is not to succumb to impulsive reactions, but to strive to foresee the development of events. A manipulator always acts based on strategic planning, and the best defense against them is the ability to anticipate their moves. Silence transforms into a powerful weapon in the arsenal of the astute observer. One of the most common mistakes people make is excessive emotional display, revealing too much about themselves. They say more than they should and delve into unnecessary explanations. Machiavelli understood that silence can confuse, command respect, and disrupt a manipulator's plans. When a person does not react as expected, the usual script of the game crumbles, and it is in the resulting void that the opportunity to gain control over the situation arises. Mastering the art of ambiguity becomes another important tool. Machiavelli taught that to maintain power, one must be able to create the appearance of virtue without necessarily possessing it in reality. In the modern world, this means being able to adapt one's speech, posture, and behavior to the surroundings without losing one's own individuality. There is no need to reveal oneself completely. It is enough to demonstrate just enough to control the perception of others. The rest should be kept to oneself, as true power lies in what remains hidden from prying eyes. And most importantly, one must take responsibility for their emotional state. A skilled manipulator thrives by exploiting another's internal instability. They need the victim to feel insecure, fearful, and indecisive. However, when a person possesses deep self-knowledge, knows how to control their emotions, and remains steadfast even under pressure, they become impregnable to manipulation. As Machiavelli wrote, a wise man ought always to follow the paths of great men, and to imitate those who have been most excellent, so that if his ability does not equal theirs, at least it will have some semblance of it. In other words, one should use the wisdom of those who have perfectly mastered the art of life, to stop being a puppet in someone else's hands. Now that we understand how manipulation works and how to strategically protect ourselves from it, a natural question arises. What do we do with this knowledge? How do we transform this understanding into real power and cultivate a new lifestyle, independent of external influence? This is precisely the question we will address in this concluding section. We will discuss how to take control of your mind and permanently free yourself from anyone's manipulative influence. It's time to sever the last invisible threads that still hold you back from freedom. It is crucial to recognize that if you don't take full control of your mind, someone else will. This doesn't necessarily mean a villainous, cartoonish manipulator. Sometimes, it could be someone smiling right beside you. Other times, it might be a phrase heard in childhood that still unconsciously influences your life. And sometimes, it's society itself, which, from an early age, cultivates a habit of obedience, concession, and silence. Skilled manipulation penetrates deep into human consciousness, influencing not only through words but also through thoughts that individuals fail to critically analyze. It preys on emotions perceived as undeniable truths, pushing people towards decisions presented as free choices, yet actually dictated by fear, guilt, and the desire for approval. True freedom begins with the realization that what is often perceived as free will is, in reality, carefully disguised conditioning. However, achieving this freedom requires letting go of the illusion of universal benevolence and dismantling the self-image of someone who must always be kind, understanding, and available. The path to freedom is fraught with discomfort, stemming from the necessity of setting boundaries, the weight of silence after uttering no, and the loneliness that arises from abandoning destructive relationships that, nonetheless, felt like an integral part of one's identity. Manipulation loses its power when the need for approval vanishes and the fear of being disliked no longer dictates actions. When clarity of intention surpasses the desire for recognition, One gains the ability to look those who tried to control them in the eye and calmly but firmly declare, "No more." The decision of how to use this newfound knowledge rests entirely with you. You can simply revert to your usual life, consigning everything to oblivion, and continue to be a puppet in someone else's game. However, there is an alternative path: to tirelessly train your mind, developing skills in observation, analysis, and resistance, ultimately learning to reshape your life according to your own will. It is within everyone's power to become an individual impervious to emotional blackmail, capable of seeing the true face behind the mask, and moving forward confidently even when those around them are in turmoil. The author invites readers to share their thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Was there a moment in your life when you realized you were a victim of manipulation? What was that click that opened your eyes to what was happening? Or are you still caught in an emotional game and need help breaking free from the cycle? Don't be afraid to speak out, as verbalizing the problem is the first and necessary step towards liberation from destructive patterns.